stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting.
When we share stories, whether in our personal or business lives, how we share them makes a difference in how we remember them and in how we're perceived by the people we're sharing them with. When you're listening to this podcast, I encourage you to listen and consider your own related stories. To listen and think about which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. And think about how you share those stories and the messages they carry for you and for the people who are hearing them.
Well, listeners, you're in for a treat today. I got an opportunity to be interviewed on Paul Brodie's podcast a little while ago about publishing my book and what that was like. And it turns out that he has a pretty darn good story to share with us as listeners about his experience with publishing the book. So he's joining me today on Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will podcast. So Paul, could you just briefly talk about what you do and the name of your company, please?
Sure. So the name of my company is Brodie Consulting. Our publishing imprint is BCG Publishing. And the main thing that we do is we help medical professionals, attorneys, educators, business owners, people that are wanting to share their story, either for one of two reasons. One is to help them with building their business and taking it to the next level, or we're helping people with leaving a legacy. And obviously in recent times, what we're dealing with, a lot of people have been wanting to leave their legacy right now to have something once they have left us. So that's actually been a really big topic in the last few weeks, especially in light of current events.
Wow, that's really interesting. And it makes a lot of sense. I think many people are seeing the world a little bit differently right now, and they are taking the time right now to think about their lives and what impact they want to have, regardless of how much longer they have on this planet. So that's interesting and not surprising at all to me. So Paul, one of the things that I always ask my guests at the beginning of a podcast is to share something about themselves that most people wouldn't know, something that wouldn't be on your resume or your LinkedIn profile or your bio of your book. So do you have something you could share with us?
I do. So this is not on my LinkedIn. This is not, I don't think it's really on my social media at all. But I've actually been a singer my entire life and was able to get into college on a vocal scholarship. I had the opportunity to either accept a complete full ride or to receive a partial scholarship. And the deal was, if I chose to go under the lines of vocal performance at UT Arlington, then I'd be given the full ride. However, my business, what I wanted to do was to get a degree in business. At the time in marketing, eventually became a degree in business management, but I actually decided to take a partial scholarship so I could focus on the business end, because one thing I learned is while music is wonderful and there are some people that have had phenomenal careers, for the most part, you can't make a lot of money on the vocal performance side of things. So just from a business perspective, I had to decline the vocal scholarship, at least the full ride anyway.
Wow, that is something surprising. I'm so glad to hear that being shared today, because it definitely gives some context for the rest of the conversation that we're going to have during this recording. That is so cool. What was your style of music? Was there a specific genre that you were working through?
A lot of it was chamber music, a little bit of everything, going back for the last several hundred years. A lot of different performances. I mean, I can tell you what music means to me. I wasn't one of those guys that in their 20s went out and got a bunch of crazy tattoos or anything. But on my 40th, I did get 2 tattoos just because I realized, one, I was probably mature enough to finally get a tattoo. And secondly, I wanted to have 2 things that meant a lot to me. So on my left arm is a star, which is also a variant of our logo for Brodie Consulting, which is also a star. Also, it means the great state of Texas, where I'm from, and the Dallas Cowboys, which I have supported my entire life through thick and thin, and a lot of thin these last 20 years. But, on my other arm is a treble clef that is tattooed. So that is what music has meant to me my entire life. There's always a song in my head, no matter what. And, without music, I don't think life's really worth living.
Wow. So I don't know if you know this, but we officially have quite a bit more in common than we thought. I had no intention of becoming a music performance major. when I was in college, but all through high school, I sang in chamber singers. I sang madrigal tunes in chamber singers as an alto and second alto, and was in all-state choir junior year and senior year of high school. And I did do some music in college, but originally my plan was to be a music therapy major, because I understood that there was a lot of research going on around the impact of music on memory, in particular in how they were treating people with senility and Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and
So,
it is connected, and that's the
it
biggest
is.
thing. It really is. It's with speed and repetition, with recalling. It's just
Well,
a
and
wonderful
it's
field.
what I found was that it had more to do with the songs and music from their past in terms of addressing Alzheimer's and their memories. So certain songs were familiar and would bring them back to a present reality if you presented it to them. So there was a whole lot of research going on around it at the time. But like you, I hit a point after, I don't know if it was one semester or 2 semesters of school, that I realized that I really like to eat. And a music major of any kind was unlikely to help me solve that problem of not eating. So I ended up with a business degree as well. Mine was focused more on HR and management, but I think that's really funny that we had that in common. And then to add more to it, I ended up getting a tattoo, my first and only tattoo, when I turned 44. For similar reasons. I wanted something that was really meaningful to me. And I wanted, and I waited because I tell people I'm impulsive, but I'm not stupid. I wanted something that would be meaningful to me well into my life and not just for a few years. And mine is also music related, but it's not a music symbol. So, I'm so glad you shared that with me. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm looking at reminders right now in my office. I actually have 2 pictures that I had framed. One of them was from a concert I did at Bass Hall in Fort Worth, but the other one is from Carnegie Hall. And the story behind that is I actually bought the poster in the Carnegie Hall gift shop, ended up having it in my backpack going all through Manhattan, all over New York, and somehow this thing survived. Got it back into Texas, had it custom framed. And then I'm looking at actually a program right now that was framed. Those 2 programs. One was from a concert that we did at UTA at the Meyerson, but the other one is our performance program from Carnegie Hall. So it's always nice to, when I'm at the office, to be able to have those reminders. And then I actually went pro for a few years with a professional group called Scala Cantorum. And I'm actually looking at the program from May 21st, 2000, which is actually the retirement of my choral director, Dr. Ebensberger, who was also my director in college. So it's just funny how all this stuff continues to connect after all these years.
Oh, I love that. That's so great. So I know we'll get back into music as part of the topic of this conversation because it's just such a big part of both of our lives. What I'd like to dig into just a little, or maybe deeply, is about your first book that you wrote. My understanding after our first phone call where you interviewed me for your podcast was that you had a pretty, what's the word?
Health crisis.
Well, it's an important story in terms of a pivotal point in your life. So share away, whatever you'd like to share about that experience.
Sure. So after I got my degree, which my slogan was, yes, you can, 10-year plan, got my business degree. And then I was working part-time. Well, actually, I was working full-time through college, and I was going to school part-time until my final year when I was actually doing full-time for both, which was crazy time. So long story short, graduated from college. Then a few weeks later, actually bought my house that I've been at now for over 15 years. And right after that, our company was bought out. And then what I realized was, here I am, college graduate, company was just bought out. I was given a severance package, which is very generous of our owner. He did not have to do that. And I eventually went into the corporate world a little further, worked for Enterprise Rent-A-Car for a couple of years, became a manager over there, assistant manager, and then got recruited to be in nurse recruiting. And what happened was I finally got that job where I was making lots of money, but I felt like a complete mercenary. And what happened
Oh.
was I did something very crazy. I actually quit that job and spent the next 6 weeks figuring out exactly what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And every single thing pointed me in towards the direction of teaching. Now, it was something I did not do the rest of my life, but I did do it for the next 9 years. Became a teacher, became certified in English as a second language, taught that for a few years. And the reason I'm connecting that is at the end of my third year, I also had the opportunity to get my master's degree, which by some miracle I got in 1 year with a 3.9 GPA. I still don't know how I did it, but got it done. But then what happened was I really wasn't taking care of myself, Sarah. I was not. Unfortunately, the teacher's lounge is a fool's paradise when it comes to lots of free and unhealthy food. And what happened was I started to get sick. I developed bronchitis, had pneumonia, just wasn't taking care of myself. And this was roughly early May 2011. And I was just a mess. A couple of nights prior, I was having heart palpitations and I literally felt like I was dying. And I'm going, okay, this can't be good. I need to go see a doctor. So that Monday, I still taught my kids. Right after that, went to our family doctor, which we've had for decades. And the doctor did his tests, checked everything out and said, Paul, you're a mess. Did you realize you were right near 340 pounds? You were right on that level of being a type 2 diabetic, which you have in your family. So my mom's a type 2 diabetic. High blood pressure, you're right at that point. High blood sugar. He said, you're a mess. And if you don't get your act together, you're going to be dead in 5 years. Now, when someone says that to you, that gets your attention. And they diagnosed my problem. They said I have sleep apnea, which I have to this day. In fact, I actually woke up gasping in the middle of the night last night, just as kind of one of those side effects. I mean, it's not a big deal. It happens. But it's one of those things where I had to change my life. And long story short, I lost the weight and I was able to do what only 5% of our population can do. And that's actually keep the weight off. And I was inspired to write a book about it. Had all these great ideas, all these wonderful things I wanted to share. I was always a big fan of journaling. So I'm like, yeah, let me get this book done. And then what happened? I started to let imposter syndrome get in the way. Oh, what am I doing writing the book? I'm not an expert. I don't know what I'm doing. And how would I even get it published? No, how would I get it formatted? Who would I find to get a book cover? So what happened? The book got pushed to the shelf for 4 years. And finally, we do a family trip every year. We were going to Vegas and talked to a couple of friends that recently published a book. And they said, hey, we published it ourselves. We got it figured out. Ironically enough, they later on became publishers, just like myself. But the funny thing was, they're like, why do you keep making excuses? And I was like, you're right. Why do I keep making excuses? So finally, I'm on that flight to Vegas, and I decided, no more excuses. Let's get the book done. The next morning, we're staying at the Mirage, went right at the pool, right poolside, and actually typed out the entire outline of the book. A week later, wrote 20,000 words, and it became my first book, Eat Less and Move More. And what happened during that time was I had no idea what I was doing. So with having no idea, of course, being a teacher, or as my sister says, being an academic, she actually has a doctorate degree, so we call her the smart one in the family. I've only got my master's. But what happened was, why do I keep making these excuses? Let's get it done. Just dove in. And I literally spent half the day learning everything I could about book publishing, about formatting, book cover design, all those pieces, and building a team. And then on the other side of things, I learned everything possible about book launch marketing, because I knew that if this wasn't marketed correctly, then no one's ever going to read the book. So launched the book a month later, August 2015, became a bestseller. And then I decided to write my second book and then my third book. And they were actually based off of seminars I've done over the years. One was called Motivation 101. The other one was called Positivity Attracts. They both became bestsellers. And what was truly life-changing about having this one book, Sarah, was after that third bestseller, I was starting to build my audience list. I was starting to connect with other authors in the industry. And what happened was they started reaching out to me and asking me, wow, you've had 3 bestsellers in several months. Could you help me with sharing my story? Never thought about this. My initial goal was to build up public speaking business and eventually transition from teaching into that. What happened instead was we started with a coaching program, and then we developed a done-for-you service, which became our publishing company. And that is what enabled me to actually leave my teaching position 3 years ago. And here we are with the business, with the podcast, with the virtual summit, and all these other pieces. And all of this was just because I listened to people. And that's the biggest thing. If you are seeing opportunities where you can pivot your business, listen, because that's where you're going to find your target market. They're going to tell you what they need. And the biggest thing is going in that direction and not being afraid to pivot, because I turned basically a life-changing moment for me personally 9 years ago, where I had my health crisis and really had a moment of truth where I had to make a choice. And that choice was to eat less and move more, which is the title of that first book. Mm-hmm. And just by getting that one book, built a foundation for my business that here we are 9 years later having this conversation on your podcast, because it really is an amazing evolution.
Let's back up a little bit, because I'm really curious about a few of the steps in the middle here. And I'd like to dig into some of the specifics behind it. So when your doctor first gave you that news, I know based on a conversation I had at the No Longer Virtual Conference last year with Jeff Eichler and Melissa Hughes, that even if people are given a year to live, they say if something doesn't change this year, they're unlikely to make a change. It's when you say you're going to die tomorrow if you don't make this change that people will actually make a change. So when your doctor said, if you don't make these changes, then you're not going to live for 5 years, do you remember the first thing you did when you left his office?
Yeah, shed a few tears, actually.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to be dead. I did not want to do that, because I've been a person who struggled with his weight his entire life. I mean, to this day, thank goodness for intermittent fasting, because that has just saved my tail, especially this last year. But the biggest thing is this is a constant struggle. And for those that struggled with weight, it is a constant thing. Losing weight is not difficult. It is keeping the weight off long term.
Right. But let's back up again, because I think the pivot point was after that. It wasn't the doctor's conversation with you. When you think about it, did you go home or did you cry in the car?
The guys got a little misty in the car, and it got a little misty when I got home too.
Okay. And were you married at the time?
No.
Okay. So you got home and your house was empty?
No, actually my mom was there. So she's elderly, and I've always taken care of her. So
okay. So did you tell her?
Oh yeah.
And what happened? What was that conversation like?
It's just time to get it going. Shawshank Redemption, one of my favorite movies. One of the main lines is "Get busy living or get busy dying."
Right.
I chose to live.
Did you have that conversation with your mom that night, or did it hit you later on?
I had that conversation with her, and I had a conversation with a couple of my closest friends going, I've got to get this taken care of, because it's one of those things where you get to that point, especially in your life when you're in your early 30s, when a doctor says that to you, it really gets your attention, because we all think we're immortal, especially being a guy, being an alpha male, being younger. You think you're invulnerable, and you're not. And that's the biggest thing, that this is kind of like your kryptonite, when you realize, okay, I'm not going to live forever. I have family to take care of. I have friends to take care of. So it's time to get our act together.
So do you have like a visual memory of sitting with your mom that evening?
Just having that conversation. That wasn't a fun chat. So basically just developed, here's a plan.
Did she understand, did she take any of that as well? Because you said she was a type 2 diabetic. Did she think about how she could contribute to your improving your health?
Well, she was always the one that was eating okay. I was the problem.
Ah.
So, and I'm the first one to tell you that.
Yeah. So I'm visualizing you going home and having this conversation with your mother. And I feel like there's a lot more to it that we could probably find out more. But who was the next person that you talked to about it?
Probably I think it was my best friend, because he's also a big fella and he's had some health issues as well. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, he's never really fixed his, even after all these years. He's still okay, but he's got some challenges. And I think that's the thing. You have to make the decision for yourself.
Right. And
we talked about.
Did you continue to spend time with him after that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I'm fascinated by this for a couple of reasons. One is that I think a lot of people feel like when they hear a story like yours, it's not necessarily something that they could do. They don't see how it applies to them, because they don't hear the pivotal moments, and there are multiple pivotal moments, but they don't see that light switch slowly coming on. I don't believe in a light switch just coming on full bright. I believe in it coming on more like a dimmer switch, that when you have those life-changing experiences, it's not just one thing that changes your life or changes how you see your future or your role in a community or family. I think it's little individual pivotal moments. And I'm sure that you can visualize sitting in your doctor's office and having that conversation. You can visualize yourself sitting in the car with tears, and you can visualize yourself sitting with your mother and having that conversation. And again, you can visualize yourself having a conversation with your best friend and knowing that he wasn't going to be on the same journey as you were going to be. I mean, you knew that innately when you talked to him. So do you remember another moment or experience, specific time that you realized that you were doing the right thing, that you were on a path that was really going to change things for you? Do you remember a specific incident?
Yeah. Every week we're checking that scale and seeing the weight drop enough.
Oh.
Because I realized it was working and I was able to do it in a manageable way.
Which was, I know that it's really important to develop habits as opposed to routine, those are kind of different things. But when you think of the first habit that you applied to improve this, what was the first habit you started really doing and sticking to?
Counting for every single calorie that I put in my body.
You did that the day after your conversation with the doctor?
Yeah, I don't mess around.
Did you ever take the StrengthsFinder assessment?
Oh yeah, I've done those years ago.
Oh, okay, because immediately what came to mind was achiever and activator. You knew immediately what you had to do and you activated on it.
Yeah, when you get a wake-up call like that, I don't mess around.
Well, not everybody does that. That's why I'm kind of digging in a little bit to kind of figure out what it is that other people can take away from this. Because again, I think it's really important to have the context around that shift, because a lot of people don't have that same kind of ambition or motivation, even if they're terrified. As a matter of fact, many people, when they're afraid like that, when they realize that reality, they either resign themselves to it or they take it by smaller steps because they don't think that they can change immediately like that.
I think everyone's different. And it also depends
definitely.
if you've got someone as a guide too, if you've got someone there that can walk you through it. And that's why I was inspired to do
Did you have a guide?
I'm sorry?
Did you have a guide yourself that was a particularly supportive person in that?
Just really my doctor, and then just family and friends keeping me motivated. That was really the biggest thing.
So was there anyone in particular that you can remember a conversation with that really helped you move past a hard spot?
Not really, because I made up my mind. Very simple. I did not want to be dead in 5 years. To me, that meant everything, especially with, doing all this struggling in college, getting this bachelor's degree, getting this master's degree, teaching. I wanted to be there. I wanted to be there for my students. I wanted to be there for my family and my friends.
Did you start to hang out with different people, or were you still hanging out with the same people?
No, same people.
Huh.
They weren't the problem. I was.
Well, yes, I get that. I just ask that because a lot of times in those situations, you kind of have to shift your circles to a certain extent. But it sounds like you were already in circles of people who were supportive and wanted to see you succeed and were ready to help and stand in it.
Circle of trust is key.
Yeah, that's something that I would love our listeners to remember from this conversation, is that who you surround yourself with really makes a difference in whether you're going to succeed in the next thing you do.
Well, you're also the product of your environment too. So the people that you surround yourself with, those are the people that reflect you and the person you're going to become.
Did you stop hanging out in the teacher's lounge because of all the food in there?
Yes.
So that's another thing, just taking it out of your vision.
Yeah, I steer clear of that room. So that was a definite.
Wow, that's awesome. So any other stories that, like, specific incidents that you can think about that really helped you realize you were in the right place at the right time, that you were on the right path?
Well, I always believe everything happens for a reason. And that wake-up call completely changed my life. It's been 9 years now, and just the things that have come because of the path I chose, it's been amazing.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I have certain pivotal points in my memory that were really specific that helped me realize that there is a path, even if I can't see it. So, for instance, a few years back for my first keynote, I was contacted by somebody on LinkedIn that had read an article of mine called Lessons from a Stellar Tour Guide. And I had been writing about customer service for years and had done customer service workshops and presentations, but I was really wanting to do keynotes. I wanted to do more of the public speaking because that's what lights me up. And I'll never forget the call when Anna Marie Osborne was working for the International Tour Management Institute at the time. This was probably 6 years ago. And she said, I'd love for you to submit a proposal to be our storyteller for the International Tour Management Institute's annual symposium next year. And I said, oh, I'd love that. What would you want me to talk about? Customer service? She said, no, storytelling. And I can describe, I was standing in my bedroom because I had called in to tell my boss I was going to be late. I had an appointment that morning. So I'm standing in my bedroom. I had just gotten dressed. I was taking this call. I'm looking out the window at the school across the street. And when she said that to me, the first thing that popped into my head was a Richard Branson quote, which is ironic because I'm not a big follower of influencers. But he said, when somebody asks you to do something that you think might be slightly out of reach, say yes and then figure out how to do it. Oh, yeah. And that was what popped into my head. And I'm standing there. This woman was calling me from Germany, which is why I had to take the call at that time of day. And I remember this moment of thinking about it and just hesitating for moments and saying, sure, yes, I could do that. And then she gave me some more specs for what I needed to write in the proposal and told me the general time frame of how I was going to submit the proposal and who was going to interview me, because they're pretty intense about that stuff for that conference and that organization. And I remember hanging up the phone and my hands were shaking more than usual because I have essential tremors. So my hands shake anyway, but I remember my hands were shaking and I was so excited. Like I could feel the excitement and that flush coming up from my chest up into my face thinking, oh my gosh, what did I just say I was going to do? This is going to be awesome. And it wasn't at that moment that I realized it was a pivotal time. It was probably a year later after I had done that workshop or that presentation in front of a few hundred people. It was my first keynote. I remember looking back at that moment, standing in my bedroom, talking to Anne Marie Osborne on the phone and being so positively overwhelmed by that pivotal moment. Like, oh, that's when that happened. That's when that shift occurred in my head from being on the dimmer switch to being full on.
And that actually reminds me right after I left teaching, one of the things that I did, which in hindsight probably wasn't the best direction, because what I've learned about publishing is people don't really want to learn how to do this stuff. They mainly want to utilize a company like us for the done for you side and just send it to us. And the reason I share that is I took a big leap of faith right after I left teaching when I started this group coaching program. And how I did it was a webinar. Now, the reason I bring this up is because as you mentioned, you were talking about doing this proposal. Well, what happened was in the webinar, we did this offer about this group coaching program, about these modules and everything. But all we did was touch on the things we were covering. None of this stuff was built. And what I decided was if there's an audience, if we get someone that's willing to buy the program, then we will do it. And if no one does, then we won't. What happened was we had several sales. The program was $1,500 a piece and people were paying. I'm going, okay, there's definitely an audience here. So then I just learned everything I could about screen shares and PowerPoint presentations. And every week just built that new presentation, put it out live the day before. And we did that for 10 weeks straight and built the program out. And I think that's one of the best pieces is when you do find that there's an audience, go in that direction. Doesn't have to be perfect, but if people are there willing to learn what you have, then why not?
So do you remember going live with the offer before you had anybody take you up on it? Do you remember that moment and what it felt like?
Yeah, I was like, I wonder if anyone's actually going to buy this. Because
And
there was no pitch, there was nothing fancy. I'm like, hey, this is a program, this is what we're doing, this is how it's going to help, these are the things that are going to be offered. And people started buying. I'm going, wow. And I'd actually get things going. This person's paid you $1,500. This person's paid you $1,500. I'm like, okay. And this is just for my email list. I'm like, my job.
Do you remember when the first one came in and you're like, oh,
yeah.
I guess I have to build this program now?
Well, first of all, I felt like it was Christmas because I'm like, all right. And then secondly, I was like, yeah, okay, guess I'm building the program. And that's exactly what we did. And the ones that did it loved it. But what I found was they just, people went through it, but not everyone went through it. And I'm thinking, if you're going to spend your hard-earned money, why aren't you going through this program? And Don't get me wrong, we had a lot of people did. Over half of our people that bought the program did. But then I'd ask the other people, like, why aren't you getting it done? And they realized, well, there's just too much. There's just too much with this process. I'd just rather pay you more money to have you do it for me. And just by, again, listening to that person, listening to those people that said that, and especially when we started working more and more with businesses, that's when we pivoted. That's the biggest advice I can give to anyone, especially with business, is listen to your audience and what they want, and then pivot in that direction because it works.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I remember the first registration I got for my first No Longer Virtual conference, and I had such a bittersweet feeling about it. I was so conflicted because I was so excited to move forward with it, but I had this sense of responsibility as soon as I received that money that, okay, now I have to really give them something of value. And I remember being a little intimidated by that. And now, of course, we just finished our 4th year, and it's an amazing experience. And people share these beautiful stories about their experiences at No Longer Virtual. But that first year, man, I remember putting a lot of pressure on myself because I felt like people were trusting me with their hard-earned money. They were making an investment in something that I was providing. And I remember feeling really conflicted about that.
Well, the main thing at the end of the day is outcome. And when you know that you can give your clients an outcome, that's the biggest thing, especially us on the done for you side, because we had those systems for our book publishing and their systems for book launch marketing where we can literally tell someone, yeah, you're going to be #1 bestseller, but that's just part of it. The whole point is how you're going to leverage that. And that's the biggest thing that we focus on. Like, yeah, we're going to get you there, but just realize then what are you going to do with it? Because it's a nice thing to have, but now we need to talk about leverage. Now we need to talk about getting you on different podcasts, preparing your press release, and getting your business ready for that next step. Because the other thing we do is make it crystal clear about their offering the book. Every single book that someone does, that needs to be not just a book launch, it needs to be a product launch. And that's one of the biggest things that we emphasize is, okay, which specific service do you want to include with this book? And then when you have systems like that, I mean, it's like Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come.
Well, this has been a really interesting conversation, Paul. I really appreciate your story of resilience and your sense of motivation and ambition. It comes very clear in your stories. So I appreciate your sharing those with me.
Absolutely.
So just to finish up or wrap this up so that our listeners can know what to do next, associated with this podcast will be a blog post on the Elkins Consulting website, elkinsconsulting.com. And I will have a link for you to connect with Paul on LinkedIn and also to check out his website and the services that his company, Brodie Consultants, provides. Paul, is there anything else you'd like to share about how to reach you?
Yeah, just our website. It's getpublicsystem.com. I do have a free book on there if your listeners would like to check it out. It is based on our Get Published book. You can also check out our podcast on there and also get more information about how we can help with sharing your story.
Great. Paul, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You. How you tell them will. If you're planning an event or company retreat and want to bring in a memorable, entertaining, and highly practical speaker as your keynote speaker or workshop facilitator, please visit us at elkinsconsulting.com to learn how we can help and provide a memorable keynote or breakout session. Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you.
to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away?